Welcome, Richard. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to speak with you again. For those of you who are not aware of Richard Silberstein's work, he's a Professor Emeritus of Neuroscience and a scientific researcher. Early in life, he developed an interest in the mystical teachings of Theosophy, and he was fascinated by parapsychology. His first degree was in physics, and then he went on to complete a master's and a PhD in neuroscience because he realised there could be value in using scientific theories to further the understanding of parapsychology. He has since completed research on ADHD and the relationship between brain connectivity and creativity. He's also developed a method of brain imaging called steady state topography, which he is using in his current research into twin telepathy. Richard's open-minded curiosity is evident in the way he combines evidence from different fields and is perhaps one of the reasons why he has such a distinctive perspective. He connects many diverse topics, including brain communication, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the idea of a transpersonal creative field, consciousness, parapsychology, and quantum physics. We're very fortunate to have the opportunity to ask him a few questions today. On the topic of brain communication, the default mode network has become a bit of a hot topic recently with its link to meditation and psychedelics. Your research has shown how this network is associated with creativity, and you've also discussed evidence that suggests this and other regions of the brain appear to filter our access to what could be a deeper, non-physical reality. I wondered if you could share your thoughts on how the functioning of the brain might relate to experiencing different levels of consciousness.
Wow, that's an interesting one. First of all, if you look at the literature, sometimes you get the impression there are like two states of consciousness. There's our normal waking states, and then there's universal consciousness. It's sort of one or the other, and I don't think that that's correct. Ultimately, at a very deep level, there is a sense of universal with literally the universe, because I think the entire universe at a very deep level is consciousness, but not the sort of consciousness we think of. I tend to think of, in philosophy, it's called neutral monism. That is to say, let's look at, I'm getting a little bit to one side, but if you look at an individual, okay, there's the brain, the physical entity, etc., etc. But simultaneously, there is something else, let's call it, just for words, consciousness, that interacts with the brain. It's that other domain, what I'll call consciousness, which enables things like telepathy, remote viewing, all sorts of things, the near-death experience. All these things are made possible because of this other thing. Some people call it soul, whatever. So to me, those are these two domains. Okay, but what I'm saying is both of them are manifestations of something deeper, that is deeper than what we call matter energy and what we call consciousness, whether it's called proto-consciousness, something more fundamental than anything. And I gave a talk a number of years ago to the Scientific and Medical Network, where it was called the conscious universe, where I sort of said that essentially I speculated that these, what we call matter energy, what we call spirit, soul, consciousness, are both manifestations of this very deep thing, something different. And the analogy is like in physics, you have magnetism and you have electrostatics. In other words, electrostatics, you rub a piece of plastic or amber and it'll pick up things, and that's an electric field. And then you've got a magnet, a compass, and that's a magnetic field. They look completely different. And yet they're both manifestations of the same force called electromagnetism. It just shows itself in different ways under different circumstances. And that's the way I see soul, spirit, whatever you want to use the word, and matter as two manifestations of something much more fundamental. And in fact, I speculate, that's okay, I'm allowed to speculate, that essentially that the coming into existence of the universe was the time when this apparent split occurs between matter and soul, spirit, etc. So when that occurred is when the universe came into existence. We see the physical manifestations of it, but simultaneously, in a sense, there was this other expression of this domain. As I said, both of these are manifestations of something that is much, much deeper. And maybe ultimately, at the end of time, they come together again. And then the cycle repeats itself, is my speculation, and others as well. So I'm getting a little bit ahead. So when we talk about this very, very deep, consciousness is the basis of everything. What I'm talking about is this thing that what I'll call proto-consciousness, or deeper even than what we call spirit, soul, or matter. So I just want to get that little bit out of the way first. Now, there are brain manifestations of these different states of consciousness, and you see them to begin with in meditation, for example. And there's been a lot of work on EEG and functional magnetic resonance imaging during meditation. Probably the most common observation during early states of mindful attentiveness is an increase in a type of brainwave which normally peaks around the frontal region called frontal midline theta. Okay. Can you see a slide entitled frontal midline theta?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
All right. There's a sort of a crude looking model of a head, and the warm color indicates where you record this most strongly. And basically you see this during the focused attention, etc., the sort of maintenance of attention in meditation. That's been around for a long time, and beyond the fact that it's a sign of degree of mindfulness and attention, I don't know whether it really points to a deeper state of consciousness. Probably what is more interesting is some work published in 2004 by Antoine Lutz at the University of Wisconsin on looking at Tibetan Buddhist meditators and EEG as they went into a very deep state. Can you see a slide, long-term meditators, self-induced? Okay, don't worry about reading that. What I'm going to explain to you. What Antoine did was to take a number of Tibetan Buddhist monks who had been meditating for, in some cases, decades. And they went into a very deep meditative state where they basically, it was a loving compassion meditation where, in a sense, they suppressed all thought, sense of self, and just sent love, and essentially became almost pure awareness. And what you saw was something that was amazing. Those graphs that you're seeing there, those sort of smudgy lines, that's what's called gamma activity. It's around 40 to 80 cycles per second. It's normally extremely small. You can hardly see it. And with these Tibetan Buddhist meditators, it was huge. And I speak as one who's worked with EEG. I was actually at the lab when they showed me some of the data before it was published, and I was blown away because I thought, I've never seen anything like this. Now, I'm going to go to the next slide, and the important point is the bottom right-hand graph, where there's a little R and then there's equal sign 0.79. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. What that shows is the size of that gamma activity is correlated with how many decades of meditation they'd been doing. So those numbers, 15,000, 30,000, 45,000, these are hours of meditation that they estimate they have done. And basically what you're seeing is the more meditation, the higher the state. And this was essentially almost a state of pure awareness as well as loving compassion. And why I say pure awareness is this gamma activity and this the normal EEG activities which we see both relate to how the brain conveys information. Why is this potentially important or interesting? Basically, when different parts of the brain talk to each other, they talk by synchronous oscillations. If two parts of the brain start oscillating at the same frequency and stay, they're actually talking to each other. And that doesn't matter whether there's a nerve pathway there or not. They talk by oscillations. They sing together, if you will. Now, here's the interesting part. The parts of the pathway where we process sensory information, take things in, uses a particular frequency. It uses gamma frequency. But the part of the communication where the brain, essentially there's a feedback where you have a thought and that influences other things, that uses a different frequency. And so what this is telling me is that these meditators are in this very high state of almost pure awareness. What the significance of that is, the person that we see now, here and now, sure, there's an aspect of consciousness and the brain, and that's a unique combination, but essentially that consciousness is an aspect, a small fragment, or what you will, of this deeper self. It's the deeper self which experiences reincarnation, etc., in projecting an aspect of itself into waking consciousness. So in a sense, it's not as if our personality, the us, reincarnate. It's the deeper aspect of ourselves, which incorporates the memories, experiences of many lives. Now, that deep state, this realization that, for example, the being of light is an aspect of oneself, which one experiences, that I would see as a very deep state of consciousness. But you don't see it in the brain activity because at that stage, there is no brain activity. So I think there is a limitation to this link between looking for these different very deep states of consciousness in terms of brain activity. Sure, brain activity will tell you certain things, and I'm interested in brain activity, but there's a limit because ultimately some of these very deep processes do not occur at the physical level. They occur at non-physical levels, and what I mean is this other aspect. So that's one of the main points I wanted to make, that sure, there are interesting and important brain correlates of deeper states of consciousness, but there's a point where, in a sense, it doesn't go any further, and those deeper states do continue, but are not necessarily reflected in the brain. They may be reflected in terms of changes in one's behavior and attitude, and it is recognized that, for example, people who've experienced near-death experiences quite often come back with a changed perspective in how they see life, values, etc. I mean, one of the most common things is they lose their fear of death, which is an obvious one, but a deeper change of personality as well. So, Lorraine, does that? I've tried to address your question in a way that makes sense for me. Is that okay?
It does answer various things. I think what I've asked is maybe an unanswerable question, but I was just interested to hear your perspective because you have, well, like you said yourself, you have a foot in both camps, and kind of struggled isn't the right word, but I reading about different theories, thinking about Henry Corbin's Imaginal World, and then there's Roberto Saggioli's three different levels of consciousness, and I just think I want to know how do they all come together, but I think it's just something that it can't be solved in a short Zoom chat.
Yeah, look, there are quite a few schools of thought and learning. I mean, some of the ones that I was familiar with, which doesn't necessarily make it right, it teaches there are up to to begin with, very many levels, deeper and deeper levels of consciousness to begin with, maybe 7 levels, physical and others, etc. Whether it's 7, whether it's 5, I don't know, and it extends. But I certainly believe that there are these deeper and deeper levels. I think there are stages, there are hierarchies. If you look at even the body, you could argue that each white blood cell has an elemental level of consciousness. In fact, I think it has. And then there are deeper and deeper and more coordinated regions, deeper levels of consciousness. I think humans, ultimately, I think at some level, we begin to see that we are part of something even bigger, etc. We somehow we have maintain our sort of, there's an element of individuality, and at the same time we recognize this deeper level as well. And ultimately, maybe it all becomes together. I don't know at what stage. I'm speculating now because, as I said, I'm simply based it on what I've read and what makes sense to me, but that doesn't make it right. So, but certainly it's consistent with everything that I'm reading. And when you look at observations, as I said, things like the near-death experiences is actually a useful way of actually another, if you will, insight dimension to these processes, as well as what the mystics have reported, what people who have undergone deep training report. You put them together and they sort of suggest there are these deeper and deeper states of consciousness. How they fit together, how you get there, that's still an open question. I don't really feel equipped to comment on that. Maybe, who knows, next life I'll come back to you.
No, it's been fascinating. Thank you.